Will you remark further on the bill? Senator Hwang. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Madam President. I rise in support of this override vote. But before I go, I want to acknowledge the great work that was done by Senator Schlossberg, Representative Larry Butler, Representative Kupchak, and the countless other individuals that have heard hours and hours of testimony from both sides of the aisle. I think we crafted something that reflected some of the changes that needed to occur. I think when we look at 830G as a statute, nearly 30 years in the making, it had indeed a very noble mission. We had a blue panel discussion that addressed the issue of past practices that may or may not have been right in its treatment of a diverse population that we want to espouse. But saying that, 30 years later, nearly 30 years later, we are looking at a statute that has remained static, and it has not fulfilled the ultimate mission of affordable and workforce housing throughout our state. When you look at comparable states like Massachusetts and various other communities, states in this country, they have adapted and made changes to keep up with the changing time. For us to go back to the past practices of redlining and biases, they may have existed. But the fact, if we do not make changes and we continue to do the same thing to apply a statute that has not kept up with the times, we are doing a disservice. We are not solving the problem. So what we tried to do as a committee was to hear all sides of the stories. And I really genuinely felt that we were open and receptive and engaged in hours and hours of discussion. The bottom line was this was not a significant overhaul, or as certain people have said, a significant weakening of this legislation. This was a tiny movement, a shift to allow our municipalities to encourage with a carrot rather than a stick, to lead them to build more affordable workforce housing. What I'm fearful of, this inability to override a statute that was thought out, that was bipartisan, that incorporated viewpoints and changes, is the fact that we will go back to the same adversarial, stay out of my town unless you sue me kind of attitude. Our reality of this statute is it hasn't solved the problem. And for us to continue to think doing the same thing over and over and over again would fix the problem that is inherently there is, in some medical terms, insanity. So I implore this chamber to see beyond what was thrown out, the feelings, the fear, the innuendos, and recognize, for me, as a fellow co-chair of housing, there is nothing more important than to afford every individual in this state affordable, workforce, and appropriate housing. It is fundamental to what we espouse to be part of the American dream. And I have publicly acknowledged the great work that the governor has done in regards to eradicating chronic homelessness of our veterans and chronic homelessness of people out in the streets. I compliment and applaud those efforts. And those efforts were because we made changes. We made innovative, collaborative, multi-party changes. For us now to say that we should not change 830G, that we will weaken it, and disrespect the tremendous work of all committee members, all the advocates that gave all of the time and effort to share their viewpoints, is disrespectful to the people we represent. This is a small change. And if we should override this, The fact that if I share with advocates that have opposed this override is simply this: the work has only just begun. This is a part of a fresh new change to say, here's a new look. Here's a new look for housing advocates. Here's a new look for the administration. Here's a new look for people that have opposed A30G to come together and say, this is a new start. Let's solve the problem by working together rather than us versus them. So I implore us to consider the override as a step forward in a collaborative, bipartisan effort to solve a problem. It is so long overdue. And it isn't the end of the solution. It is a small start. So I urge support. I urge us to explore the fact that even though we may disagree, to get 24 votes moves us forward to fixing a problem that we all agree exists, and over nearly 30 years of A30G has not solved. We might cite certain communities, but the problem exists. People have need for housing everywhere in our state. We have not solved the problem. And for us not to do anything is what we called, again, insanity. So I urge the override support. I urge us to understand the renewed commitment that this is a start. It is not the end. We have a tremendous need to do right by every individual in the state. And I'm repeating myself because there can't be a more important mission, what we do in this school. And I want to compliment the 101 representatives that stood up and said, we're going to represent the people and we need a change. And I hope the Senate can show its strength by representing that 24 plus senators can make that change. So I urge support. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator. Will you remark further?